Good afternoon, everyone. Can we stand for the national anthem? Thank you. You may have your seats. And before we get into the actual program, we have a short video we'd like to share with you. So do enjoy.
Make conscious of ours and pipeline stronger. New policies and plans to take action. Educate the entire nation. Water is a finite resource that needs urgent recourse. Save water. Save water. For me and you. Save water. For the future too. Save water. Every drop you can. Save water. For the Caribbean. Save water. Same challenges. Together we'll find the solutions. Together we'll take action. Our water secure Caribbean is a crucial mission. We need some urgent action. Leaders of our nation. Save water. Save water. Save water. For me and you. Save water. For the future too. Save water. Every drop we can. Save water. For the Caribbean. Save water. Save the water that falling from the sky. Save water. Full up your blueberries. Save water. Full up all your berries. Save water. Full up your blueberries. Save water. Full up all your berries. Save water.
Excellent. And first, let me apologize on behalf of Minister James. She should have been here with us. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, she's still at the Parliament doing her presentation. So we are hopeful that throughout the course of the evening, she will be able to join us. Your Excellency, Dr. Christophe Eick, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and Special Envoy for Climate Issues in the Caribbean. Ambassador Sophia Soni, who is with us virtually. She's the Special Envoy and Ambassador for Climate Change of Grenada. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, esteemed guests. A very warm welcome to this third edition of the German Caribbean Climate Talks. Special thanks to the Climate Resilient Water Sector in Grenada, GCRUS, and our friends at the German Development Corporation, GIZ, for allowing us to start our program with such a vibrant message on conservation and climate change adaptation. I am Godfrey Augustine, and I will be your Master of Ceremony for this evening. And we do truly appreciate that you've chosen to spend your afternoon, evening with us. And just before we get into the meat of things, as we say in Grenada, just a few housekeeping matters. So our washrooms are at the back through the door. In the unlikely event of an emergency, the exits are clearly marked. We also kindly ask that your cell phones and other devices, electronic devices, be placed on silent. And of course, there's coffee and water at the back. And we're also inviting you to remain with us after the presentations for some great refreshments and, of course, to continue the chat with our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, this event, Raising Ambition for Resilient Islands, will take a deep dive into climate ambition and adaptation after the seminal United Nations Climate Change Summit, COP30, which concluded recently in Belém, Brazil. As a small island developing state, which is highly vulnerable to climate change and is still responding to the devastating effects of Hurricane Beryl, Grenada is a testament to the importance of resilience building in the face of escalating climate impacts. This is indeed a timely event, and the German Embassy must be applauded for bringing this excellent panel together. Awareness raising and knowledge sharing are critical to ensure our islands not only survive, but thrive. At this point, I am pleased to present our host with the official welcome, His Excellency Dr. Christophe Eick. Now, in addition to Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency also serves as Ambassador to Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Suriname. And as noted previously, His Excellency is also the German Special Envoy for Climate Issues in the Caribbean. Your Excellency, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Augustine, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Her Excellency Sophia Soni, Special Envoy and Ambassador for Climate of Grenada, Dr. Spencer Thomas, COP30 negotiator and Special Envoy for Multilateral Environmental Agreements, Ms. Abigail Ellis, National Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network. Dear friends, a very warm welcome to our third Caribbean German Climate Talks. I would like to thank, of course, the government of Grenada for their hospitality and climate analytics for again partnering with the German Embassy. It is the leadership of small island development states like Grenada that provides the moral authority and political impetus needed to spur larger nations into action. After climate talks on just transition held in Trinidad and Tobago and on loss and damage held in St. Lucia, we would like to use this event in Grenada to analyze the outcomes of the recently concluded COP30 in Belém, Brazil, and to illuminate pathways forward for effective climate change solutions. As Germany's Special Envoy for Climate Issues in the Caribbean, I have a vested interest in addressing climate change issues in this region. and in particular in advancing Germany's support to help building resilience and capacity. As many of you know, Germany has been engaged in the Caribbean region for a number of years. The German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ, is currently active here in Grenada, and as we have just seen in the video presentation, increasing climate change resilience in Grenada's water sector. GIZ experts are also present in St. Lucia and in Barbados, and the GIZ's regional country office is located in the Dominican Republic. And I'm particularly honored that we have our colleagues from GIZ, from Dominican Republic, and from Grenada here in the audience tonight. So thank you for being here tonight. In July this year, I signed a number of new project agreements on technical cooperation with CARICOM. These new projects, with funding of more than 30 million euros, will focus on renewable energy, circular economy, conserving biodiversity, blue economy, and skills development. Germany also lends financial support to the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which is active in a number of Caribbean countries, including in Grenada, with a focus on nature-based solutions for adaptation. Ladies and gentlemen, small island development states have contributed the least to climate change, yet they are among the worst impacted. Grenada knows this all too well, having suffered a crippling blow with Hurricane Beryl in July last year. But Germany as well is affected by rising temperatures and the effects that this has. This is why at COP30 in Belém, we put such an emphasis on what is called the transition away from fossil fuels. We would have liked the conference to have adopted a binding roadmap for such a transition. Instead, Brazil and the upcoming COP presidency were charged with starting a process that hopefully will help close the gap to the 1.5 degrees limit. So it is fair to say that the negotiation results on reducing greenhouse gas emissions fell short of our expectations. There was, however, some good news. Let me mention in particular the real progress on protecting rainforests, an issue which the COP rightly brought into the spotlight. The new Rainforest Fund, the Tropical Forests Forever Facility, supported by countries of the global north and south, is a true breakthrough. Over the next 10 years, Germany will contribute 1 billion euros to this forward-looking fund linking forest conservation, local development, and climate action. Agreement to triple the support for climate adaptation by 2035 needs also to be mentioned as a positive. Also, an agreement on a comprehensive expansion of power grids with investment plans totaling $1 trillion. The acceleration of the reduction of methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. And, quite important, I think, the launch of the first call for funding requests from the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, with an initial allocation of $250 million. Ladies and gentlemen, before I close, a few words on adaptation. As we all know, climate financing is critical, especially in this field. In 2024, Germany's climate adaptation finance from the federal budget totaled 2.84 billion euro, close to half of our total climate finance. At COP30, Germany announced that it would make 60 million euros available to the Adaptation Fund. Germany remains the largest donor to this key multilateral financing instrument for climate adaptation measures. I'm pleased to note that the Adaptation Fund has just approved $10 million as a grant to Grenada, which aims at enhancing resilience in the agricultural sector. So with these remarks, I look forward very much to engaging with you this evening, and I thank you all for coming in spite of the inclement weather. But I think that we all who live in the Caribbean are used to that. It's not always sunshine, and rain just belongs to this region, and it's good so. So thank you very much. And Mr. Augustin, I would ask you to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, we do appreciate your valuable observations and insight, and listening to you intently. I know I can speak for everybody here, we look forward to the constructive results that the increased cooperation between Germany and the Caribbean is expected to yield. We look forward to it. I heard 10 million, is it for Grenada? Yes, yes, indeed. I have an ear for things like that. Yes. We should have had the minister doing the feature address at this point, but as I said earlier, unfortunately she's not here, and we're still hopeful that she will join us a little later. Now, ladies and gentlemen, many of you may know that Grenada has played an influential role in advancing global climate action. One of the most notable contributions is through Mr. Simon Steele, a proud Grenadian and a former Minister of Climate Resilience, who now serves as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. His leadership and dedication have brought recognition to Grenada on the international stage, highlighting our commitment to climate resilience and sustainable development. With COP30 having recently concluded, we are especially grateful for Mr. Steele's participation in our program. He is joining us via a video message which demonstrates his continued dedication to strengthening climate action within Grenada and the wider Caribbean region. His involvement underscores the significance he places on enhancing climate initiatives at home, even as he leads efforts globally. Let's hear now from Mr. Simon Steele, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary.
Colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure to share a few words with you today at these German-Caribbean climate talks. As someone shaped by these islands, by their beauty and their remarkable resilience, this dialogue is close to my heart. Just under 2 weeks ago in Belém, 194 nations showed that climate cooperation is still standing firm, still delivering, even in a fractured geopolitical moment. COP30 did not solve every problem. No COP can. But it helps set the conditions for faster, broader, real economy action, action to protect communities, strengthen economies, and improve people's lives. Across the negotiations, countries advanced outcomes that keep the Paris Agreement moving forward, bending the emissions curve further downward and ramping up investment and implementation of bold new climate and adaptation plans. But we all know that we need to move much further and much faster. And here, the Caribbean's voice, the Caribbean's experience is so essential. Our islands are living proof of both the costs of inaction and the opportunities of decisive climate leadership. When storms grow stronger, when seas rise higher, it is Caribbean families who feel it first. Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique are still recovering from the devastation of Hurricane Beryl. Jamaica is beginning to rebuild after Melissa. For us, vulnerability is not an abstraction. It is daily life. But the Caribbean is also demonstrating what climate progress looks like. Stronger adaptation planning, more resilient infrastructure, and innovative local solutions, all powered by determination, ingenuity, and community, and strengthened by international cooperation. Germany has been a valued partner in this work, and this dialogue reflects the kind of cooperation the world needs more of. Partnerships built on respect, on shared responsibility, and on the understanding that the front lines of climate change are also the front lines of climate solutions. But friends, ambition without support will falter. This is the era of implementation, and its greatest test is not the strength of our aims, but the strength of our action. So my message is simple. We have the tools, the direction is right, the progress is real, but the pace is still far too slow. These German Caribbean climate talks are an opportunity to change that, to deepen cooperation, expand support, and turn words into real protection and real prosperity for the Caribbean and for the vulnerable communities everywhere. I hope this dialogue leads to new partnerships, new investment, and new resolve. Because together we can and we will build a safer, more resilient, and more prosperous future for our islands and for the world. I thank you.
The Executive
Colleagues,
Secretary.
friends.
I was wondering if he came through the door. You know, listening to him, he said his message was simple, but I'm sure we'll all agree that's very, very powerful indeed. We are pleased now to introduce Ms. Rana Haynes, Director of Climate Analytics Caribbean, an organization committed to fostering a climate-safe, sustainable, and equitable future. Ms. Haynes also provides strategic and technical support, as well as capacity building to the Alliance of Small Island States during climate change negotiations. Ms. Haynes will now offer her analytical perspective on the outcomes of COP30 and discuss how these decisions may help advance efforts to narrow the ambition and implementation gap. Ms. Haynes, you're most welcome to the podium.
Colleagues, specially invited guests, excellencies, good evening. Perhaps I will start by acknowledging the continued excellent collaboration between climate analytics and the German embassy, in particular Ambassador Eick, that has been going on for about 2 years now, with this third edition of the German Caribbean Climate Talks, which we hope to use as a basis to continue to build on this collaboration moving forward. It is much appreciated, the faith that you've put in us at Climate Analytics to help to run these very important sessions. I would also like to register the strong collaboration and support that has existed for many years between Climate Analytics as a global organization and the government and people of Grenada. We are deeply grateful for the continued support and the continued faith that the government of Grenada puts in climate analytics as an organization, and we hope that the collaboration that we have will continue to grow from strength to strength. So with that, welcome to all of you who braved the inclement weather, as the ambassador highlighted, and the traffic on a very cold Thursday afternoon to be with us. We're very grateful for your support, and I'll also welcome those who are with us online. Thank you for joining us. I have the task of going through with you some of the key outcomes from COP30 as I see them, which covers off on some of the areas already raised by the ambassador, but also takes a deeper dive into many of the technical outcomes and issues that were discussed at the COP. I need the clicker. Thank you. Is it on? always an exciting time with these devices. There we go. Okay, so let's start by considering a bit the context and the mandates that existed heading into COP30. As Executive Secretary Simon Steele noted, we are in an increasingly fractured geopolitical climate, especially when it comes to issues of an environmental nature. So heading into COP30, there was quite a bit of trepidation, I would say, in the international community that following on from the lack of success coming out of the plastics negotiations, the delay coming out of the IMO negotiations, that COP30 as well would falter. And this did hang over the entire conference a bit like a cloud. And so there was, in my view, a real attempt made to manage the expectations around what could come out of this COP. There were strong calls that this COP should be focused on implementation, that it should look to operational decisions, decisions that help parties to go home and actually implement the decisions that have been taken to date. And in that vein, it was also proposed that there was no need for this COP to try to go beyond in terms of ambition on what had already been agreed. And these two ideas around whether we focus on implementation or we focus on ambition was set up as opposing ideas heading into COP30. I will also say that you could hardly find two states parties in a room that would agree on what they mean when they say implementation and that COP30 should be an implementation COP. It's a term that was used in very many different ways and was capable of being interpreted to mean very different things. So nevertheless, we did have some mandates that needed to be concluded by this COP. First and foremost, around the adoption of the indicators for the implementation of the Global Goal on Adaptation. Now, this is the conclusion of a multi-year process that focused on operationalizing the goal to enhance adaptation and resilience that exists in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. The final step in this process being the adoption of an indicator framework that would help parties in the design of their national adaptation plans and also assist parties and the international community in gaining a better global understanding of where we are tracking in adaptation implementation. It sounds as if it might be boring stuff. I assure you it was the stuff of nightmares and major excitement. Parties went at one point from having 1,000 indicators and calls for more to having 200 indicators and calls for more to having 100 indicators at the beginning of this COP to then finally adopting 59 indicators that some parties objected to so strongly that it nearly held up the entire final plenary of the COP itself. We also were mandated this year to respond to the outcomes of the global stocktake. Now, the global stocktake is a 5-year process mandated under the Paris Agreement where parties get together to look at how they are tracking in relation to all of the Paris Agreement goals and then deliberate and decide on a response to that assessment. The outcome of the global stocktake clearly demonstrated that parties are way off track on every single goal under the Paris Agreement, in particular as it relates to keeping the average increase in global temperatures to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. The global stocktake saw that whereas parties' emission reductions should be bending the curve in this direction, their emissions reductions were in fact still going in this direction. And so even though we can say, coming out of the GST decisively, that parties have bent the curve downward from a projected increase of about 3.6 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels to one where we're on track, business as usual, if everybody implements what they said they're going to do, a 2.6 degrees Celsius increase. We know that this is not enough. We are already witnessing what is happening as we approach that 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. We are seeing the supercharged hurricanes that are marching through the region, and not just here. All over the world, we are seeing what is happening with the floods and the storms and the glacial melting in areas where there are mountainous regions. We are seeing what is happening in terms of drought, sea level rise, and we are just about at 1.34 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And so this is very concerning. This year, parties were supposed to bring forward their new climate plans or nationally determined contributions that should have been economy-wide and 1.5 aligned in order to respond to the findings of the global stocktake. To date, not all parties have brought forward their climate plans. To date, almost no party of the 130 or so parties who have delivered plans that are actually 1.5 aligned. It's a vanishingly small number that have responded at the level that is consistent with the urgency and that responds to the present moment. So against this backdrop, we were heading into a COP where scientists who are supposed to normally be, very conservative people have been sounding the alarm about what is happening in their observation of the global climate. And so we had a number of reports last year indicating that for the first time, we had reached 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We expect that it will go down this year because of a number of factors, but it means that we are perilously close to breaching that limit. And in fact, this year, there are reports that say that we have already locked ourselves into an overshoot of that limit. We also had, in a bit of better news, the outcomes from the various advisory opinions that were delivered last year and this year from the ICJ, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And these opinions provided us with an extremely strong legal basis for understanding what exactly the obligations are of countries in relation to climate action and what is this duty of care and the standard that they need to exercise in order to meet those obligations. Spoiler alert, the duty of care is a stringent one. And so we're heading into COP with, for want of a better term, melee. So what happened in Belém? Or Belém, as it's supposed to be pronounced in the Brazilian way? Well, I would say that I really did not envy the Brazilians at all. I think at many points during the year in preparing for COP30, they expected that it might be smoother sailing. They expected that this refrain around the implementation COP would hold sway. They expected that parties would get to Belém and get down to the business of adopting operational decisions. When we got there, I think they were very surprised. There were a record number of new agenda items proposed, because parties and groups of parties came to Belém with their special interest issue demanding that it be addressed. I think in the end it was maybe about 9. 4 proposals floated to the top for special treatment. Those were around a response to the NDC synthesis report from AOSIS, a response to the biennial transparency synthesis report from the European Union, and 2 agenda items from the like-minded developing country groups, one on finance and the other one on unilateral trade measures. During the year, there was also a proposal coming from the Brazilian Environment Minister for a fossil fuel roadmap, which Ambassador Eick did mention. This proposal, however, only gained legs very late in the process. It was not the topic of intense negotiations and really only stepped into the spotlight in the very final days and final hours of the COP. We also had the delivery of the Adaptation Gap Report that demonstrated the embarrassing position that we're in globally around adaptation finance, where when we look at the adaptation finance needs of developing countries and compare it to the adaptation finance that has been delivered, we see that the amount of needs is about 14 times, 12 to 14 times greater than the adaptation finance that has been delivered. So this was a crucial gap that needed to be addressed, and least developed countries consequently proposed a new adaptation finance goal to triple adaptation financing by the year 2030, but we got out of those discussions with a goal to triple adaptation financing by 2035. Compromises needed to be made. So a look at some of the key outcomes, and this is by no means all of the outcomes. At a COP, there are anywhere between 20 or 30, sometimes even up to 40 decisions taken, and those are normally complemented by declarations and agreements that happen outside of the negotiated process, like the Fund for Forests that Ambassador Eick referred to. So the top level decision coming out of this COP is called the Mutirão decision. It is a Brazilian term that they used as a means of activating the imagination of parties. Mutirão means to get together, to be able to speak and converse honestly, to look for solutions. And so we have the Mutirão text that took sort of 3 main decisions. The first on the establishment of the Global Implementation Accelerator and Belém Mission to 1.5 for the implementation of national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. This particular outcome is seen as insufficient when it comes to the question of addressing the gap in mitigation ambition in particular, but also on adaptation action. But it is also seen as a useful floor to build our efforts in this area starting next year. The Mutirão decision is where we were also able to establish the goal to triple adaptation financing by 2035. And in that decision, it also establishes a work program on finance and roundtables on climate change and trade. And these are all significant. They are all based in the 4 agenda item issues that I highlighted previously that were raised by groups of parties. And so they became a part of the global compromise that defines the outcome of COP30. We know that the Brazilian presidency will lead a process on fossil fuel and nature roadmaps. The nature roadmap is supposed to deal specifically with deforestation, And these roadmaps are to be concluded next year. We have no idea how the Brazilian presidency is going to go about this process, and we also have no idea what the impact of those roadmaps will be once delivered. But there is certainly scope and a lot of hope that these roadmaps will help to stimulate global climate action in these critical areas. We also agreed on a new mechanism for the just transition. And now just transition is an issue that has emerged as a major priority for many developing countries, asking themselves the question of how they can transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient development pathway. What are the steps? What does it take? Notably, in the context of this decision, we have perhaps the most expansive use and language around human rights that has ever been agreed in the context of any UN climate decision. So it's worth having a look at. It speaks to the rights of indigenous peoples. It speaks to the need to protect human rights in the context of this shift onto low-carbon, climate-resilient development pathways. I spoke about the bacchanal around the GGA indicators, the 59 indicators that were adopted, which were the subject of much controversy in the final plenary, a number of states taking the floor to object, but only after the official adoption had been formalized. And we have now an outcome that is very unclear as to how we move forward with these indicators. There was already an agreement that further work will be done. There is already a Belém to Addis vision that will carry that work from this COP to the COP in Ethiopia to be held in 2027. But with very many parties being so upset with the 59 indicators that finally came forward, we do expect that there will be quite a need for discussion and reconciliation starting next year on this issue. And finally, there was an agreement for a new regular report to be issued on the state of loss and damage. And this is quite significant. It was a hard-won ask from vulnerable countries to have this regular report prepared. And it's important to note, because as we are not on track at the moment to limit warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius, as we have likely already committed ourselves to some overshoot, and we must be looking now to limit the scale and duration of any overshoot, it does mean that there will be more and more loss and damage. Loss and damage in the economic sense, loss and damage in the non-economic sense. And this is an issue that has perhaps been treated a bit as a stepchild of the global climate process in the 30 years of its existence. And we still have a lot of ground to cover, including in the Paris Agreement, even though we have made significant steps forward with the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and other institutional arrangements for loss and damage. There is still significant ground to cover in how this issue is addressed. And so this regular report on the state of loss and damage could be very useful in that context. And finally, here we are in the aftermath. We've witnessed the showdown in the final plenary on the issues of the fossil fuel roadmap and fossil fuel language and its potential inclusion in the mitigation work program. We know that there has been a lot of dissatisfaction expressed with the adaptation indicators that were adopted. There is still a lot of skepticism about the multilateral process and whether it actually remains fit for purpose. And even though we went into the COP with exceedingly important advisory opinions coming from seminal international courts, and in fact, the highest international court in the world being the ICJ, we don't see any references to those advisory opinions anywhere across the suite of decisions that were taken in Belém. And that is not by chance. that is by design. I would say that even though very many parties, especially amongst vulnerable countries, especially among small island developing states, relied heavily on the reasoning that is available now through these advisory opinions. There were, in their arguments during the COP, there were also very many parties who did not want to acknowledge those findings, who claimed that those findings were not relevant to the UN climate discussion, and who argued that they should be kept out. And so, in terms of future work on the advisory opinions, I think that they will continue to influence the positions that states adopt and the arguments that they make in these discussions. Certainly, the proposal from AOSIS for a new agenda item with a response to the NDC synthesis report was very much grounded in the ICJ perspective on the legal nature of the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit and on the importance of NDCs being responsive to that limit. I think in terms of multilaterally agreed language, we have to look to the UN HQ process in New York, where a draft resolution is underway to see really how the international community responds eventually to these advisory opinions. So with that, I thank you very much, and I hand back over to you, Godfrey. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haynes, for your valuable updates and insights, and listening to her, I think it is imperative that as small island states, we have work to do. We do have the support of countries like Germany that is doing quite a bit to help, but clearly some of the bigger nations that are responsible for what is happening, they're clearly not stepping up the way they should. And as small island states, I think we need to do what we can. Whatever small we can, we need to do it to protect ourselves. We now welcome your guests to participate in an open discussion. And an outstanding panel has been convened for your benefit. And so, I welcome again to the stage His Excellency, Dr. Christophe Eick. Ambassador. Also joining us virtually, Ambassador Sophia Soni, and she's Grenada's Special Envoy and Ambassador for Climate. She will be joining us via Zoom. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Spencer Thomas, fresh from negotiating at COP30. And Dr. Thomas is Grenada's Ambassador and Special Envoy for Multilateral Environmental Agreements and is the country's lead negotiator for climate change. We welcome Dr. Thomas. And we're also very pleased to have Ms. Abigail Ellis, the National Coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, SIAN. And this organization is a non-profit network organization dedicated to improving the quality of life for Caribbean young people, which has established itself as an important drive of environmental and sustainable development. Thank you all for joining us. So our panelists, they will discuss a number of issues, and of course, following that, we would love for you to put some questions to them as we go deeper into this very important discussion. And we'll start this evening with Ambassador Soni. Is she with us?
Hi.
Right, there she is.
Yeah.
Welcome, Ambassador Soni.
Wonderful.
Yes, so Grenada has consistently demonstrated leadership and ambition in climate diplomacy. How can regional collaboration across CARICOM be strengthened to increase negotiating power and advance shared climate resilience objectives?
Great, thanks so much for the question. But before I give the answer, I really want to first commend Rana on an excellent presentation discussing the very technical aspects of the outputs of the COP process. And I'd like to commend the government of Germany for supporting these really important discussions, focusing on the Caribbean climate perspective, and the government of Grenada for hosting this third edition. So really happy to be part of this panel. So it's a very important question. And I think, as CARICOM, we need to consider the strategic leverage of regional collaboration. The Caribbean region exists amongst this powerful coalition of global SIDS within the climate COP space. And we've heard a lot of what that space looks like from Rana. With our consistent and powerful advocacy, we've always won the moral argument, which is that we are vulnerable countries. The legal tenet that constitutes our special circumstances is well captured within international conventions and frameworks delivered through the United Nations, as well as within the Paris Agreement. And so as we consider increasing our negotiating power, we must now try to win an economic argument, which is looking as CARICOM as an investment block to help enhance our climate resilience. So not looking at us as a charity case. If 1.5 to stay alive continues to be our clarion call, then the only way that we can survive is through effective collaboration. The government of Grenada will continue to advance its leadership in this space, and we're quite proud that we have delivered our updated national adaptation plan, and that plan is well costed. And we will move forward to launch our updated national determined contributions as well. But as a single nation, we're just a single voice. And no matter how loud we speak in many of these international spaces, it's often drowned out by the noise of the larger G20 countries. And so in considering how we can strengthen the power of CARICOM, there are 5 ways and 5 strategies I think we can continue to pursue. The first is looking to quantify what the Caribbean or what the CARICOM risk is through looking at our data. Within the COP negotiations, we tend to have this unified voice, this unified block. But once we leave the COP negotiations, we are negotiating island by island for implementation and effective strategies for climate development. So when Grenada stands up and says Hurricane Beryl costs us 16.5% of our GDP, and Barbados says the same thing, and then Jamaica also speaks to its impacts of Beryl, and now Melissa, we always treat these as very separate stories. What we need to consider is how we leverage the aggregation of those stories through the lens of climate impact data into a regional economic argument. It then becomes this macroeconomic crisis that the MDBs like the World Bank and the IFIs like IMF, they cannot ignore. And so we need to consider how we harmonize to calculate and report loss and damage that Rana referred to across the Caribbean. And more as we begin to better understand how a unified data set is important within negotiations, it allows us to empower ourselves and to make the rationale for economic investment into our vulnerable countries for sustainable development, instead of this overarching reliance on the moral or climate justice narrative or argument. So that's the first point. The second point is looking at pooling our technical capacity, particularly for transparency. We're all now at the point of advancing our biannual transparency reports. For many of our small islands, we deal with capacity constraints. These administrative burdens to ensure that we're compliant is often quite crushing. And so typically the approach is that we look for external support. We bring in consultants. And so Grenada has a process of hiring a consultant, and then St. Lucia and Barbados and so on has a very similar process. but it's hiring separate consultants that are solving the exact same reporting problems. One way that we can leverage our unity as CARICOM is to look at a shared technical hub within CARICOM for transparency reporting. This allows us to show the world that we can unify across the collective Caribbean countries for a harmonized approach and standard to show that we can lead on transparency tracking in climate finance. And what this does is that it removes the excuses that donors usually apply to our vulnerable countries, that our government systems cannot be trusted. And it is showing the world a level of commitment that shows of our own accountability and compliance to our pledges. Thirdly, we must continue to speak with one voice, not just for the amount of financing to close a financing gap, but how we effectively access this financing. At COP30, and Rana did such an excellent job in speaking to the outcomes of the adaptation goal, where we saw new pledges to the adaptation fund and the amount of US 134 million, including advancing the tripling of the global annual flows to adaptation by 2030. But as much as we work to advance these efforts within spaces and close and bridge a climate finance and divide, access to climate funds continues to be a very slow process for our countries. Access then becomes the enemy for us. Many countries continue to face challenges in leveraging the available grant financing for much needed implementation due to these accessibility issues. Therefore, we must continue to advance this collective call that couples both access and amounts, including ensuring that we can build the right enabling environments domestically and regionally to unlock sustainable large-scale financing for climate. This is where we have to draw on the opportunity to leverage the power of regional collaboration that focuses on the multidimensional vulnerability index. We need to stop negotiating for money based on GDP per capita, which disqualifies many of our islands, and start looking at it as a transition. If CARICOM, like Global Small Islands, right, can coalesce around this political call, then it draws this hard line that says we only negotiate finance based on vulnerability. And this allows us to change the rules of the game. Fourth, we really need to solve the capacity crisis. Within negotiations, we've had to become very innovative and strategic, utilizing the power of the Global Small Island Collective, getting expertise from many of the different islands, because when we get into negotiations, we are already burdened. Many of our countries are coming to these negotiations with 4 or 5 people, and we are sitting in a room negotiating with larger countries that have armies of negotiators. And so within CARICOM, we also have to consider a strategic structure that's typically used by the Alliance of Small Island Developing States within negotiation, allowing us to pool our multifaceted expertise across our islands. And what this does is that it allows us to better prepare for these negotiations, not just within the negotiation rooms, but also outside of the negotiation rooms. So we need to continue to reinforce our ability to prepare in advance by leveraging strategies that have worked for us. And we need to start that preparation from before we head into the negotiating rooms. And finally, and to the point that Rana made as she was closing her intervention, is that we really need to look to strategically leveraging the ICJ advisory opinions. One of the many narratives that we struggle with as small islands is the constant perception that we are begging for money. And not that it is a legal obligation by those who bear the responsibility to ensure climate justice, to ensure that there is delivery of resources and compensation to our countries, the most vulnerable. This is why the ICJ advisory opinion was so instrumental and timely. And it was led by the voices of a coordinated global small island effort. And CARICOM needs to own this win. If CARICOM speaks with one voice, so that failure to cut emissions is a breach of international law, then we move the negotiation from charity to liability, presenting a firm legal basis rather than a moral plea that should continue to be the foundation of our narrative. And so in summary, As CARICOM, we have the political leadership. We even have Son of the Soil, Simon Steele, leading the charge at UNFCCC. We have the attention, and we continue to demand the attention. Now we need regional technical harmonization. We need a shared political strategy that considers a legal and economic basis. We also need a political strategy that considers a cohesive voice that couples together both access and amount of financing when we talk about bridging the financing gap and delivering for vulnerable countries like ourselves. This allows us to be better placed so that we cannot be bypassed within the negotiations, inside and outside the Climate COP theater. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sonny. And I'm sure there will be a few questions from the audience in a bit. So we'll move now to Ambassador Eick. Ambassador, Germany has been vocal about the need to raise global ambition to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. And we heard earlier that we may have gotten there at some point with the expectation of going back down. But coming out of COP30, what do you see as the most important next steps for the international community?
Well, I think.
Yes.
Okay. I think really for keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach, and we all know how important it is, and this is really a question for the larger states, very much so, because we have to make some progress on reducing greenhouse gases. That's the only way that we're going to be keeping 1.5 within reach, by increasing our mitigation efforts, by reducing greenhouse gases, by moving away from fossil fuels. I know that many countries are trying to do their best. It's probably not enough. It is important that we all do it, small states as well. I think I said it in the beginning that small island development states, small states also like Grenada, because you are so affected by climate change, you are leaders also in solutions, and Simon Steele alluded to it as well, and Ambassador Sonny. I would like to say maybe one or two words on the ICJ opinion, because this is something that is very close to my heart. I used to be legal advisor for the German government, including pleading for my country in front of the International Court of Justice. And this is why I can appreciate really the tremendous success that small island development states, including Grenada, have achieved by bringing about this advisory opinion, which should really, and I was interested to learn from Rana Haynes how difficult it was and how impossible it was to bring it into the negotiations at COP. And probably I would agree that the next or the best and the most likely place for it to have a follow-up is the UN, is the General Assembly. And Germany, which has supported the request for an International Court of Justice advisory opinion, will certainly also be on that side. But coming back to 1.5 degrees, really it is up to the large emitter states, and Germany is still one of them, to do more. The COP negotiations, of course, were difficult ones. I think, I'm not sure whether it was mentioned already, that one of the big states, of course, was missing. The United States government was not there, the federal government. We had, of course, from the United States, important players such as California and other big and large cities, which, you know, it was very good to know that at least in part in the United States, one is still committed to fighting climate change. But we have to get everybody on board, and this includes also the oil-producing countries. That was, I think, a factor that did play in COP30, in our view. We had a lot of pushback on moving away, transitioning away from fossil fuel. For this, we need to have everybody here on board. We need the small island development states. We need Grenada just as much as Grenada may need us. We may have more funds at our disposal, or at everybody's disposal, but you have the votes, you have the voices. And if CARICOM continues to unite and have a strong common voice, I think this would be a good thing for all of us, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eick. We'll move now to Dr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas, as someone directly engaged in negotiations, what were the most critical advancements coming out of COP30, and what does real successful implementation look like for Caribbean states?
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. And again, I want to also report to the previous. Oh, it's off.
Press a second.
Yeah. That's it? Okay. Yeah. Well, I was saying thank you very much for the question, and I wanted first of all to recognize the efforts that we heard already from the previous speakers, and that who have set up this panel quite well. First dimension was on the inclement weather, and I think I need to make a comment from Belém, because Belém was a COP with a difference. There was tropical, torrential rain every day, almost. We had flooding, we had fire, we had temperature, we had high humidity, we had demonstration, we had security breaches, we had heavy military presence, we had everything. But yet still, and we had chaos, and we had an outcome. So I think that is the first point. But after every COP, there is always a debate as to whether the COP is successful or is a failure, after every COP. And I think you will hear people saying different things from different point of views. And there is no consistent framework to evaluate the success or failure of a COP. But for us, I think it is important that when we look at the outcome of a COP, that we take certain things into consideration. One, did we make progress? Did we regress? Was the progress incremental, or was the progress transformational? We got to look at it along those lines. And the lens must, of course, be whether the science, the best available science, is infused in the decision, whether there is urgency in the decision, whether there is a significant gap in terms of ambition, when there is an ambition gap, and implementation. So these are some evaluation criteria. And of course, we must look at the pillars, the mitigation pillar, the adaptation pillar, means of implementation pillar, the loss and damage critical, and of course, transparency, issues with equity and justice, and the bedrock of all is whether or not it advances sustainable development and eradication of poverty. So these are some of the lenses that we need to look at, and the framework in which we look at to evaluate a COP. So, what came out of Belém? I was taking a couple of notes on some of the things that came out of Belém from Rwanda. I've already indicated, and we heard the executive secretary spoke very well. But I think in terms of the critical advancements is really that we actually reached a consensus. And we had an agreement. That, to me, is again a demonstration that the multilateral process is alive and kicking, and we need to continue in that line. Belém was 10 years since the Paris Agreement, 10 years. And of course, we understand what happens with the Paris Agreement in terms of people going in and out of the Paris Agreement and sucking out a lot of energy from the Paris Agreement, sucking a lot of energy out of the process in the meantime, and sucking out a lot of monies from the process. It's very important. The geopolitics was very critical, and we heard the threat to the multilateral process, very critical. We heard from the setup that Rowan have already given. The whole question about the geopolitics and the assault on the science itself, IPCC as the best available science. All of this basically was part of, so to get a solution amid all of those is a great achievement in my view. And how the reaction of the EU and Germany, again, is quite important. We heard about the G20, maybe it should be the G19 now or something like that, because one might be always missing. And we found out also that with the 10 years of the Paris Agreement, would we have a Paris Agreement today? Are we able to negotiate a Paris Agreement today? I don't think so. What happened to IMO? What happened to the plastics? What happened recently to the plant treaty? And those are the kind of issues. So I don't think we could have, we will be able to negotiate a Paris Agreement in this current environment. So the idea here is that the process is working, and we come to some kind of conclusion on the Paris in terms of the outcome that we have here. So that is the first point. The second point is that there is a focus now, a shift towards implementation. We move from a situation of targets, emission targets, and burden sharing in terms of who will take care of the finances, to a situation where we're shifting now into an implementation mode. And this is critical. We heard a lot of the ICJ opinions and so on already. And while we're speaking about the COP, we had 50,000 people registered in that COP, which is maybe one of the second largest, I think, COP in the history. So the focus on implementation is very important. The focus on people, the focus on nature, the shift to implementation is critical. And the role of in terms of implementation, we heard a lot already about what happened with the renewable energy efficiencies and so on, and the parallel processes for transitioning. So what does a successful COP look like for us in the Caribbean especially? I will start with maybe 4 points. One, from the special circumstances of seeds and LDCs. And how do we respect that, and how do we populate that in the COP? To me, it's all about the flow of finance from developed countries to the Caribbean. It's always had to do with the flow of finance, and not only the quantity of the finance, but also the quality of the finance, the speed, the agility, and whether or not this finance is grant-based finance or loan financing. It's quite important. So this, to me, is a critical issue. So finance for adaptation, finance for mitigation, loss and damage, capacity building, technology. It is important that we measure the success for us in the lens of financial flows into the Caribbean, into those specific areas to adjust, especially our resilience. So this will be a critical area for. The second critical area, I think, will be the issue of the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Mm-hmm. This will be a critical for us, as indicated already, so I don't want to go back into all of the technical issues. We heard about overshoot, we heard about all the implementation, acceleration, and so on, the NDC implementation and the gaps and the assessment. So that will be a critical area for us in the Caribbean. The third one will be the issue of the just transition and the low carbon future. And we already heard, again, much about the issues relating to its importance. But again, just transition, we need to really agree on the scope. I think there will be still will be some issues on the scope of the just transition. But people and community has been centered in the discussion, and I think that was a great outcome for us. And finally, I think we need to look at the whole question about what happened inside and outside of the process of UNFCCC. We heard about the roadmaps that might be outside and parallel to the processes and so on, and how they get into the process will be something that we have to look at. But I think one of the critical issues will be the reform of the financial system, international financial system, and how we do to ensure that the cost of capital is reduced so that we can have investment in our economy. So this, to me, will be the 4 major areas for us in the Caribbean to look at the outcome of the COP. as a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. And finally, Ms. Ellis, there was a time when many young people, in fact, and I can, use myself as an example, prior to Hurricane Ivan, I was elated about the idea of experiencing a hurricane until it came. And it was a first for many young people. But the times that we are living in, I think many young people will face a lot of these natural disasters, specifically hurricane. And so, Ms. Ellis, of course, during the lifetime of today's youth, the Caribbean will face more severe climate impacts. That is a given. What top priorities should our countries undertake to enhance climate action and ambition and secure a more sustainable future for our next generation?
Good evening, everyone. Forgive me, I was having a coughing fit before, so if my voice sounds a bit manly, that's the cause that I'm female. Thank you so much for that question, and I'd first like to start off by acknowledging Ambassador and my dear colleague here, and of course you, the audience, and to all of you as online. And again, my name is Abigail Ellis, and I'm the National Coordinator for the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. But for this segment, Abby is fine, yeah? Now, as it relates to your question, and I will start with the example that you gave. Prior to Hurricane Ivan, many young people probably look forward to a hurricane coming. And I can tell you, in my lifetime, I've experienced 2.5 hurricanes, if you count Emily as a hurricane. And I don't think I'm looking forward to any more hurricanes or any form of natural hazards to hit Grenada. And I'm saying this because as a body, and young people inside here, we are the first generation to actually witness the climate and the deterioration of our lands. And we're actually the last generation that has the power to stop it. And I say this because never in the history has individuals, or even yourself, gone to bed one day and wake up to realize the river that was once there disappeared. The beaches that once existed disappeared. It's a first in our history. And I'm saying that we're the last generation with the power to stop it, meaning that we have a window of opportunity still to address it if we strategize properly. So to answer your question, I heard capacity building mentioned at least 3 times throughout the discourse this evening, and I want to start there. The power of young people needs to be institutionalized. Too often, as a youth myself, I feel like our presence are more symbolic rather than collaborative. And I see a lot of young people here shaking their heads. And I can literally point out all the youth in the room. I wouldn't do that because I don't want to expose some of your age. But youth adjacent. Okay, that's a new one, right? But I can point out the young people in the room. And let me tell you what has happened and how we feel. Can I be real with you for a moment? Yeah. So you invite us to forums, sessions. It looks good. It ticks a box. Our faces on a flyer or whatever, it is there. But yet for all, oftentimes that's just it. That's where it stops. It stops with presence and no real action. And I think what needs to be done, we need to have actual institutions where youth are actual negotiators. So we need them to be trained in it, and it has to be annually. It can't be accidentally. It can't be every time we need to address something reactively, but we need to be more intentional about our young people, where they're located in the systems, how they're positioned, and properly equip them with the tools and resources so that they can be active collaborators and participants in what is being done. So I think that's one of the first key places we need to start. I know in many government systems, we give them the opportunity to go to COP, Khalifa permit me to point you out, we do have a young person in the room who would have attended COP together with the GRENADA team, but that's not enough. And honest, if we're being real, we actually need to see more young people into the spaces, but we constantly see more scholarships being given out for law. Or we see more scholarships being given out in the business sector or the medical sector. When was the last day you've seen an actual scholarship for climate studies or environmental law? If you want to address it, you can put up your hand. I have no problem in that. But I really do think that we need to empower our young people and institutionalize them. And secondly, after we've done that, we need to build better economies, especially climate resilient economies. Let me explain. When I speak about building better climate economies, it's not solely about building back better as in our infrastructure. As a Caribbean island, there are three major sectors that are oftentimes most prone to the shocks of climate events: tourism, agriculture, and fisheries. You can agree, you can disagree. The truth of the matter is these three sectors are oftentimes the ones that are trying to catch up after a natural hazard. For example, we just witnessed Hurricane Beryl that ravaged our sister islands, Carriacou and Petite Martinique. Now, what I'm about to tell you is actually real and personal experience. I went up to Carriacou after to assist with cleaning up, and I still went back up after during the building process. And while we are putting mechanisms and access to financing in place for these economies and sectors, I agree that the pace at which things are done is too slow, and sometimes the bureaucracy, you have a fisherman, he loses his livelihood, and then he's still trying to catch his foot 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. We have farmers who are still recovering from Hurricane Ivan. And mind you, that was 2004. We're in 2025. And so if we're not trying to build better economies rather than infrastructure, then guess who's inheriting that? Me. And you. Well, for the younger ones. And our children. And so if we're not being a bit strategic, intentional, genuine in how we approach it, we don't have an inheritance here. That's sadly what it is. And so I will stop at these 2 points. I do believe we need to institutionalize young people in all sectors, from the policy making process, from the time you think of it as a concept to when it's being executed, and to actually build more climate resilient economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abigail. And of course, I'm very thankful to the panelists for their insights. And so we'll now invite your guests to contribute to the discussion. You may have questions, or you may want to contribute in some way or the other. It is now your turn to do that. We have a microphone at the center. So we have a gentleman to the microphone. Can you say your name, and then you can go ahead and...
Yes, my name is Ron Beggs, and I am the representative for the World Youth of Climate Justice. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, given the outcome of COP30, what changes can be made in the policies to hold the large emitting countries accountable? And how do you believe this can benefit small islands like Grenada?
Thank you very much, Mr. Beggs. Dr. Spencer, you going to take this one?
Yeah. What changes can be made in policy? That's a big one. But let me go back again to maybe a story which I must have related already. Several years ago, I had a debate with Mr. Charles here as to what is the most important issue in a COP. And he said to me, he thinks it's finance. And I said, no, because we must mitigate. We must adapt. You know, we have to do all the good things first. He said, no, it's finance. So he called a minister, and minister there said, Minister, what is the issue? What is the most important thing? He said, finance, finance, finance. So I lost, and I accepted that. but we continue to fight a lot on this. In terms of your direct question, though, I believe finance flows will be the critical issue. It's a critical issue. So any policy for us will have to dovetail into finance. We need to be clear that we have policies in place on the national level for adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage. We need policies across the board. And we need to have budgets to address those policies. And of course, we need international cooperation. So all of these we'll have to put together in terms of the policies. But in other words, we need to have a consistent framework on the national level and on the regional level to deal with it. Because what the COP is doing is to providing a consistent framework on the international level. That is the reason why the UNFCCC negotiation is quite important. Because without the UNFCCC, it's chaos. Despite what you might hear, well, you go into COP all the time and you go into COP all the time. If you don't go, what will be the alternative? It's chaos. So that's the problem. If you don't have people speaking to each other, even if they don't agree with each other, but they continuously to speak. So the idea here is to ensure that we have that process, that multilateral process going, so we can form the policies that will engender advancement on the national, regional, and global levels.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Are you? Okay, you can.
Thank you very much. Now, the follow-up question I do have is, for large emitting nations, how do we ensure that they meet the requirement of the NDC or the NDC's requirement, the national determined contributions?
Rana, yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. It's the question of the moment, right? Maybe I'll make 2 points. First of all, according to the ICJ advisory opinion, states have a duty to cooperate to address climate change. That is a legally significant duty, and that also covers the work that states do in the context of implementing their nationally determined contributions. Because it is legally significant, it means it is also justiciable. The second point I would make is that the ICJ has said that it is not enough for states to design, submit, and maintain NDCs, which are their clear obligations in the context of the Paris Agreement. The ICJ has found that states are also required to ensure that those NDCs are 1.5 aligned. Now, it is not yet well understood what the impact of this finding will be on state behavior. Certainly, with the advisory opinion coming forward in July of this year, when many states were still in the process of developing their NDCs, we do not have a decisive understanding of whether that opinion has impacted the level of ambition in those NDCs. But what we do know is that whereas before the prevailing view was that nationally determined contributions are nationally determined and that states are under no obligation to actually fulfill those obligations, that view is wrong. It is legally incorrect, according to what the ICJ advisory opinion says. And so, in the context of the Paris Agreement, international cooperation has been the prevailing mode of work for ensuring that parties meet their obligations. It is not a legal basis for operation, but a political one. I think, though, now we are in a different situation outside of the process where legal remedies may be available that can address this issue, albeit on a state-by-state basis. Now, I'm not arguing that one approach is better than the other, because certainly if we take the approach where we sue states individually one by one for their climate action, we may still end up in a 2.6 degree world because of the length of time that that would take. And so there are definitely drawbacks. I think that even in this COP, we saw a much greater emphasis on the importance of international cooperation. And that perhaps might be a more fruitful place to exert our efforts to ensure that we can all get there. So maybe I'll leave it at that. I don't know if anybody else wants to hazard an answer.
Dr.
I mean, I would agree. I would totally agree with what you said. I have a lot of sympathy and a lot of admiration, really, for how far those that have argued in front of the ICJ have gotten. But I think it's also important to focus on what is politically possible and feasible, and not to hope that one day we will get one state going after another state to claim for damages. I think it is important to really focus on the political process, and I do agree that this has actually been one of the successes of the COP, that there were negotiations. I mean, it could have gone much worse. Could have gone much worse. People were talking to each other, and we had results, although many of us think that they were not sufficient. But I think this process is important and is key.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to remind us, of course, that we have a convention and we have two protocols. We must not forget the Kyoto Protocol and the philosophy of the Kyoto Protocol vis-a-vis the philosophy of the Paris Agreement. One, top-down, bottom-up. And the world now becomes basically a bottom-up situation. Everything is voluntary. Everything is based on your national circumstances. Everything is based on, I will do what I can do, and that is all I will do. That's the new mode. The other mode has been destroyed. Just wanted to remind us that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. We quickly running out of time, so we'll take two more questions, and then we will wrap for this evening. We have someone. We'll say your name, and then you can.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Benish Joseph, and I am currently the Deputy Director of the Caribbean Cooperative Measurement Reporting and Verification Hub. It's a company that's registered in Grenada, and it was established under the German government through the Eick grant, and that's how we came about. Now, I've heard a lot of talk about capacity building, and I heard Ambassador Sonny, indicate that there's a need to pool technical capacity across the region. And that is exactly what the Caribbean Cooperative MRV Hub, we say it for short, was established to do. And I just want to point out that we've been able to pool technical expertise across the region. We actually have 2 young persons, we spoke about youth, as part of the hub from Grenada, and that's Khalifa Philip and Miss Ayana Bowen. They're right here in the room with us as well. And they've been able to build capacity, train persons across the region. We're also supported by all 12 English-speaking Caribbean countries as well. And we have a steering committee that's based on those countries. What I want to ask now is, how do we come together and work together as different organizations, different entities, to ensure that, one, our reporting is done in the most transparent way, continue to build capacity. We've heard the youth speak out, and there's a need to a continuous need to build capacity in the region to develop the expertise. We need to be able to pool resources, pool organizations, come together. So I want to hear from the panelists, what are some of the ideas, what are some of the opportunities here to work together, work with the hub as well, and to pool our resources to build the capacity in the region, not only in Grenada, but across the Caribbean region.
Thank you very much. And Ambassador Soni, can you coming on this one?
Sure, thanks. And I really want to commend the speaker for raising that question and also sharing the outcome of some of the work that we've done internationally and how that's translated to action on the ground. And I think it's a very important question. And I think it's one of the things that we have struggled with. And how do we scale the capacity that we have? How do we streamline the capacity that we have so that we take advantage of the people in our region to support the implementation and solutions that are coming into the region? So I think here's a couple of immediate thoughts. One approach could be to look at the role of policymaking at the regional level. Most of our islands, we all deal with a lot of the same capacity constraints. And typically, and I think I said this in my initial intervention, is that the same sort of approach of going island by island to build capacity is what we're used to. And we're seeing that it doesn't work. And so one way that we can work to combat that is to really ask our political leaders and our decision makers to consider how we strengthen the regional policy environment to then allow us to build a framework that gives us the tools and guidance to do the necessary streamlining and alignment and the pooling, as you've just referred to, of resources and capacity to better position ourselves for success. So that's one idea. And I think the other idea, directly to the point on really activating the youth network, I think that's really important. This idea of institutionalizing and formalizing a youth network that can help advance the solutions on the ground, it has to start with national legislation. And so if youth champions can work with their decision makers, with their political leaders and champions to institutionalize this network, this is something that can be taken and scaled at the regional level to then become a policy that we can benefit from. So those are two quick reactions. I think it's quite feasible. The one final point I would make is that we're seeing too much of a siloed and duplicative approaches in the region, where many of the resources that are coming in are being wasted on repeated implementation approaches that don't really bring us closer to the goal. And I think we have to be more strategic on how we leverage those resources, because time and time again, we're hearing from international donors that they're no longer in a position to give the resources as they used to in the past, and that we have to look for more innovative mechanisms. This is a reality that we're facing now and we're going to face in the future. And so with that in mind, I think it's more beneficial more than ever before that we look at maximizing the strategies that have worked and look, as you said, to pool the opportunity of the many different expertise that we have across the region. So just to summarize, looking at strengthening regional policy and also supporting the idea that we need to institutionalize youth networks, bring that into policy to allow us to be better positioned to support strategic implementation measures that have the impact that we're looking for.
Thank you, Ambassador. Any final question from the audience?
Before we take that question, allow me to add, and firstly, I want to say congratulations on the work that you're doing and to your two colleagues that are sitting here amongst us. And this is not just for the climate space, but one of the things I've found lacking is the collation of data. Data collation I don't know why we're so secretive in the Caribbean. Let me just say that, right? So we're all working on projects, our organizations have different mandates, etc. And almost as if I am working against you when we're all working towards similar goal, like my colleague would have said. So I think one of the things I would love to see, and one of the things I think we need to do, is to pull our experts together, our data analysts, and the people who are versed in research, put together whether it be a platform that is accessible, where you can go and see the different organizations, their mandates, the projects they're currently working on, projects they've completed in the past, et cetera, et al., right? And I think if we do that, then it would be a bit easier, because oftentimes you have organizations that does amazing work, and you just don't hear about them, you just don't know about them if you don't talk to somebody about it. And again, sometimes you have organizations who are doing amazing work. You're currently going to write for a grant to do the same thing that they're already doing. And so it almost seems as though we're working in silos and not collaboratively, when we could be leveraging our strengths together as a team, unified, not just in Grenada, but throughout the entire region. So if you're a data expert in this room, because it's not happening, I just give you a business idea. Conceptualize, put together a platform that we can go on to, or whatever program that we can go on to, where you can have access to these information readily available, because that's not the case here in Grenada. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Eick, you wanted to comment before we take our next question?
Yeah, just very briefly, because your intervention reminded me that last year, when many of us were in Antigua for the SITS4 conference, we were talking about a data hub and center of excellence, and this is it about it's about to be set up, and it's a process, of course, and many of us are actually supporting it. Just by chance, I saw that yesterday. We gave a contribution for the setting up of this data hub and center of excellence, and this is I hear this everywhere I go in the region, that data is critical, and that data collection is so important for a region that wants to work together as a whole and have a voice. So it really is. It's good that this is coming into being, and I hope it's going to be a success.
Thank you, Ambassador Eick. Oh, yes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Rosanna John. I just wanted to delve further into a point made by Rowena about the justiciability of the ICJ decision. As we know, there are at least two other advisory opinions out there. The climate negotiations are going very, very slowly. So I was just curious as to whether there have been any discussions about a coordinated approach to strategic litigation, in terms of putting a bit more pressure, especially now that we have these opinions in place. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Always the lawyers with these questions. Hi, Rizzy, how are you? Maybe I should just ask Ray to answer this. Yeah, so there have been discussions around how the region should respond to the opinions. Those discussions have been happening in multiple fora, generally amongst lawyers across the region. They have not as yet been institutionalized in any way. And so I would say that at this point, there is no discussion on the issue of strategic litigation, at least at the regional level. I don't know if individual countries in the region are considering this. I know that there are individual countries in the Pacific that are considering this, along with a suite of other responses to the ICJ advisory opinion, grounded in raising it in the context of the UN climate negotiations, the resolution in the UN General Assembly, working in the context of the, in Geneva, in the Human Rights Council. So there are countries, individual countries like Vanuatu, for example, that are taking all of the various measures forward possible based on what has come out of the ICJ. In the region, the discussion is still very, very nascent. There have been calls for a regional approach to be taken, for a commission to be set up to understand the implications of the opinion and to take decisions on how the region will then move forward based on what's in all of the opinions. But that has yet to take hold as something that will actually see the light of day. So I think that's where we're at for now. And I see Ray nodding, so I have the nod of approval. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ruana. Any other final comments before we wrap? Okay, so let's take it quickly. Yes.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me one last intervention. I'll try to keep it brief. And it is an intervention. I don't really have a question. Maybe you can continue the conversation afterwards. But I was inspired by the words of the youth on the stage. Unfortunately, I do not count as youth any longer, according to the UN. But youth adjacent, that's right. But as a former youth delegate, I do want to just take us back and commend our region for the many environmental professional climate negotiators that have come through. 10, 15 years ago, starting this space, there weren't that many of us in those rooms and having those conversations. So it's something I think we do need to pause and take heed of, that we have actually built capacity, and it's time that we honor our own capacity and hold our own counsel. And I want to echo Ambassador Soni's words, come and speak as one voice. One of the practical experiences and that really helped was actually going through education as a young person, as a student, and learning and studying the negotiation text. And youth can be incredibly well-informed negotiators. They are a resource that we do not tap enough into. And I think CYUN has a very, very important role to fulfill, and one that has not been tapped to its fullest potential. And if there's further capacity building or funding coming through, and I think I would advocate teaming up with the universities in the region, with other capacity building networks, and devising programs that really help train and strengthen youth negotiators. Let them be part of the delegations, not just as tokens, right? And we've seen some of those examples, and they're very, very important. I mean, we know the Young Go network within the negotiations themselves, but beyond that, this also needs to become a training ground for future negotiators. And bringing people to the text so they can have those discussions, like Rosie and Kerryne just had, we can have those, we can start with those things earlier. We can start actually in the schools already. And so that would be my suggestion, and maybe a question to discuss for the ambassadors later on. How can we make finance available for that type of capacity building?
Thank you very much. And as we close for this evening, I just want to, throw something out there that maybe as we interact after we can think about. I heard a lot about climate financing, and also Ambassador Eick spoke about reducing greenhouse gases, which is very, very important. And I want to think about climate financing and reducing greenhouse gases. Let's put them together, parallel them, and see how they measure up. We can talk about it after. Yeah. So at this point, I express my sincere appreciation for your presence here this evening, and also for your valuable contributions, the panelists, and also our guest. My gratitude also to His Excellency, Ambassador Eick, for initiating this very important gathering. And so as we conclude the formal proceedings, I ask you to cordially join us for some refreshments and, of course, to continue the discussions. Thank you very much. And if I didn't see you again, I do wish you all the best for the Christmas season. Thank you very much.